My name is Betty Chapman. I was asked to work on this project because 12 years ago I wrote a book called Rough Road to Justice, The Journey of Women Lawyers in Texas. And it was a rough road to justice. And so in doing that, of course, I did research on women all over the state and found their stories, which said it is difficult to become a lawyer. When we look at the founding of our country, women who came in, particularly married women, had absolutely no rights at all. They were an extension of their husband as far as ownership and property, contracts, any kinds of decisions that had been made. So they were never in the public eye. They were the homemakers, the mothers, the wives. That persisted for 200 years. And that is really why it took so long for the suffrage movement, for women to get the vote, because they were not used to going out and demanding anything. They were to stay in their proper realm. And that ties over into the legal profession. It is not a profession where you stay quiet and you are not out there representing people and seeing that legal information is being done absolutely accurately. So, because women were not pictured, for, as I said, for a couple of hundred years, as being anyone who would do this, it was very difficult. So when the first one decided they wanted to become a lawyer, it was, oh me, we don't think so. That's not where women belong. And it was interesting, one of the arguments that I guess the male community and the legal community was that women did not need to be subjected to, they called it the noisy realm of legal work, particularly in courts. So that stymied them from doing it. But then in the 20th century, there were women who decided they did want to become lawyers. It was no problem really in the beginning to be admitted to law school, except there were all kinds of objections to you doing it. They'd say, oh, we don't want a woman in law school because she is going to be taking the place of a man. And a man is one who really would be able to go out and use their legal training, as though a woman would not be able to do that. So in the beginning, they couldn't get jobs, even if they had graduated from a law school. We did not have a woman attorney in Texas until 1910. And then it was still a very, very slow pace for them to really walk the road. And it was tough. I have chapters called Jumping Hurdles, Walking the Narrow Road. I kind of gave the chapters titles like that because that's what they really, really had to do. Her name was Hortense Ward. She had come to Houston as a divorced mother of 3 daughters, got a job as a court stenographer. Then she happened to marry an attorney, and so she read law pretty much in his office, took a correspondence course, and decided she was ready to practice. An interesting thing, though, she never appeared in court because it was thought that would prejudice a jury. There was still a lot of opposition to women becoming lawyers. It was just not where they belonged. That is not what they needed to be doing. This was not the right kind of environment for them. And so she never appeared in court, but Hortense Ward was a fierce, fierce fighter for women's rights. And even in 1913, she wrote a pamphlet called the Woman's Property Act, suggesting that women needed to have those rights, and it became legislation. It took so much got so much attention then that a bill was entered into the legislature, and they did expand women's property rights. And this is something she had just done, you know, no law degree, no active practice in court, but she was very influential in those early years in expanding women's rights in legal matters. They had great difficulty finding jobs, and so the majority of the first ones just had to open their own law office and try to make some traction that way. With time, of course, that did change some, particularly as we moved into the 50s, the 60s. But there were still levels that they did not achieve. You know, make partner was very difficult. Even sometimes to be hired by one, if that's what they chose to do, was difficult. Being leaders in the state organizations was difficult. So there were still many things that kept them from full, I would say, participation in the legal community. And again, it just seemed to be something that could not be let go, so to speak, as far as the women were concerned. Hortense Ward in 1925, which was interesting, because we didn't, of course, it was slow getting women judges, very slow. There was a case before the Texas Supreme Court, and it had to do with a land argument with the Woodmen of the World, an organization, nearly all, an all-male, and nearly every attorney in Texas belonged to it. So the governor said, all right, I'm going to appoint an all-woman Supreme Court, and they're going to hear this case. Hortense Ward was the Chief Justice. Her associates, it was one from Dallas, one from Galveston. Not many women had practiced 7 years at that time, and they weren't eligible to sit on this court unless they had practiced 7 years. But they heard the case. Their judgment was 4 months later, and so it had been considered very successful. So there we had 3 women sitting on a Supreme Court. It would be 60 years before a woman was really appointed to the Texas Supreme Court. And that was just true in so many, many things. It was a very long time before we had a woman as dean of a law school. So when it came to aspiring to maybe larger jobs, or it was difficult. It was difficult for them. And I can use an example of Sarah Hughes from Dallas, who was a young woman at this time in the 20th century. She moved to Dallas with her husband, and so she had a law degree from a school in D.C. And she thought, okay, I'll go get me a job. She could not find one. She could not find one anywhere. No one would hire her except as the receptionist for the law firm. So she went to work as the receptionist for a Houston law firm, and then was very successful at what she did. And in 1935, she was named to she was the first woman named to be a state district judge. And when that was all being done, one of the state senators, and this was appeared in the newspaper, you know, oh my goodness, she's married. She needs to be home washing dishes. So that was the kind of reception they continued to get, even though they were trained, they were capable, but there was just still this thing of women don't belong in the legal profession. And what is really ironic about her being a judge in 1935, she could be a judge, but she could not sit on a jury. Women were not allowed to sit on juries in Texas until 1954. So that is another indication that they were really pulling back on giving women any kind of activity in the legal arena. And so that just continued, I think, a very, very long time. And then they would maybe get a job in a law firm, but not given the serious cases to work on. And in fact, some of the very first graduates from the University of Texas Law School in the 1920s ended up being law librarians. That became very popular for a woman who had gotten her law degree. She wasn't going to find a job in an office maybe, but she could be the law librarian. And that was the first kind of inroad for those early graduates, at least at the University of Texas. It was just this built-in objection to women going into a legal profession, which they saw as tough, combative, and this was just not what women needed to do. And of course, I think there were also many people who really wanted to keep women in the roles they were in. They did not think that women, they needed to be at home, particularly if they had children. And of course that became another issue that women lawyers had to really deal with. It was difficult to juggle a family with a law practice. And a lot of them would leave the law in order to do that. So there'd just been lots of hurdles to jump all through the years, and I'm sure there are still some. But in the early years, it was just, this was a very, very small thing really, but it was, it happened. Charlie Farris was the first African-American woman to be admitted to the state bar, and she opened her own office in Wichita Falls, Texas. And she said, I really did all right. She was a solo practitioner for over 50 years, a very successful one. But when she went into this job, she said there was a real problem because the only bathroom in the courthouse, which I could go to, was way down in the basement, and when we'd take a court break, I didn't have time to get there to it. She said they had not planned on having women to need restrooms in the courthouse. So that was just another indication that the profession was just not really built, even from the beginning, for women because of the ideas we had about women. It was not that the woman was not competent. It was not that she was not well educated. There was just this strong objection to having women in the legal profession, much more so than doctors. We had many women physicians in Texas before we had lawyers, because somehow being a doctor is very much the womanly role or traits, and being a lawyer was not considered one. No grounds really for all of this, but it was just a tough road to follow. And with people like Barbara Jordan speaking out, because of course she was a lawyer whose father had said, oh no, and this again was the prevailing thought. When she said she wanted to become a lawyer, he said, oh no, lawyering is nothing for a woman to do. And he fiercely objected to her going to Boston University for law school, where she was one of 6 women in a class of 600. See, that is something else they had to face. When they went into law school after they were admitted, it was a predominantly, of course, male profession. And of course, she couldn't get a job and opened a law firm of sorts. But then she started registering people to vote in the 1960s in the election. And she said, oh, I have found what I want to do. I want to be part of the political scene where we can get laws changed. And so she of course was elected to the state Senate, and then of course went to the United States Congress and had a voice, literally a booming voice, in speaking out about things like that. And I would say if a young woman was really interested, see about registering people for votes. I mean, you can do that. That doesn't have to be your job. You can do that on the side. And you are by registering people to vote, because every citizen of the United States, every legal citizen, has the right to vote if they have registered. And that is a tremendous thing that is given us, when you can go to an election and study and decide who the best candidate is. And then you have that is your voice. You're not just doing it because somebody told you to go do it. I think that's something a young woman could do. I don't know job-wise what she might choose to do, but you can do a lot of things as a volunteer and really get inside of what is going on.